Do you ever have one of those days where you just can't? You cannot be bothered. Everything is too much. Getting out of the house is a freaking chore. I had one of those days the other day and I had to get out of the house and I just couldn't. I was looking at my coats. I have like a little coat hook by the door, and I was looking at the two main coats I have for winter, which are both secondhand and both beautiful, and I love them both. But they're both fitted coats, and it was a day where I just didn't want, I felt like a sausage. I didn't want anything wrapping around me, you know? So I had to put on one of the coats. But then my brain started thinking, why? I mean, you want a third coat, clearly. You want a third coat that isn't tailored, that is looser fit, and is for the potato days. So, I mean, just make one. So the plan was hatching because I had a need. And as always, I try to make it historical, even when it doesn't need to be. But in my head, I wanted something capey, because obviously it's something that's more like a cape. It's very loose fit, but it's still very elegant. So my plan for this was to start browsing historical styles. I didn't even have a specific decade in mind. I had a specific look. My idea was a looser fit, normal coat with a belt, and then a cape feature. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about the fabrics in my stash, because that is the motivation for 2024, is to use more fabrics from my stash. I remembered I had a few shorter cuts of wool that would be really nice for a coat, but I only had 3 meters. So when I started thinking about it, I decided that coats, I would either have to pick between like sleeves or a cape, and I didn't want to have to make that decision. So I kept browsing historical styles until eventually, as I always do, I ended up in the 1890s. So I do a lot of 1890s early Edwardian stuff because I find that often they're the most versatile for everyday life. Street style was really coming into play. Lots of women were working, lots of women were into sports. There was a lot more rise of like more practical street styles. Well, at least in my opinion, that's kind of how I see that decade. This isn't necessarily one of those things, but as always, I ended up in the 1890s, and I ended up buying a pattern from an Etsy shop called Repeated Originals. Their whole thing is that they take patterns from original magazines, so original patterns from the period, and they just digitize them and make them available for you. So these are one-size patterns as they came from the magazines with very, very minimal instructions. But I decided I was going to go for it, and what I found was a coat that had a main body that wasn't fitted and had a cape feature. There was also a sleeve feature, and then I thought in my head I'll add a belt, so for the days where I want a more tailored fit, it can look tailored. So I think it's going to work out really well. I have a little piece of wool I'm going to show you in a second, and I have a pattern, I have the desire to make it, and I have motivation. What could go wrong?
Okay, so it's finally time to get started, so let's get started. I've already started. But basically, here's all I have. So this is the image included in the pattern, which I assume it must be the illustration from La Mode Illustrée. And then it's got the small amount of instructions that is included with it, and an English translation. Thank you very much. But this is it. This image is all I have. But this is what we're going for. We'll see if we actually get there. But I have already made some progress. Let's have a look. So here is my mock-up. I know it doesn't look like much, and I didn't want to use any other heavier material because I have a lot of this really plain poly cotton that a friend gave me for mock-ups. So that's what we're using. And basically I cut out 2 of the fronts, 1 of the back, and 1 of the sleeve. The sleeve is super cool and like the capey bit. And I think technically, according to the pattern, you're not meant to secure it past the shoulder, but I think I like the look and the practicality of it better if I secure it to the side back seam. So I think that's what I'm going to do. But yeah, the only changes I made to it, the sizing is fine because obviously it's a very loose fit thing, and I'm going to be adding a belt to it to cinch it at the waist. But the only thing I really did was that I shortened this, sorry about the staining a lot, but so I shortened the sleeve cape portion so that it was shorter at the front and slopes towards the measurement that it was meant to be cut at towards the sides and back. And that's, I think, just for practicality's sakes. And then there is a collar included in the pattern, which I haven't done the insertion for. But I'm ready to get going because I've been putting off cutting this out for a week, so I think it's time to do it. So here are my materials. This is the wool that started it all. I bought this in Paris on sale. I think you can still see the tag here. yeah, so this is a wool blend, and I got 3 meters for €30, which I think was really freaking good. So I'm really happy with that. I think it's a lovely colour, and I'm really excited to use it. And then the other materials I have here is that I dug through my stash to try and find an appropriate lining, and obviously I don't have an appropriate lining because Victorians want to line everything in silk or satin, and I don't have either, but I have this sort of poly something. I don't even really know what it is, but it has like a Dupioni, fake Dupioni vibe about it. So it has a little bit of slip, so I think it'll be good for a lining. And it's the only thing I've managed to locate in my stash that I think would work. However, I only have 2 meters of it.
And part of me is a little bit delusional because I'm like, I can make it work. The cape is only 3 meters. I can make this lining work. It's like 2 meters and 10 centimeters. I'm absolutely delusional, but we're going to move ahead. And then the last material I have is just I have a combination here of horsehair canvas, which is not made of horsehair anymore, I don't think, and like canvas. And I bought these when I was last doing my little stint into tailoring. And these are just used to sort of stiffen certain strategic points in coats and jackets in the Victorian times. So the usual guide I use, which is this handy little book, which I highly recommend if you're getting into historical costuming. It's a bit dense to read, but once you get used to it and you like, what I do when I start a project is I tab mark the bits that are relevant and I read through them and I take notes. So I sort of translate them into my own instructions that I can understand. Unfortunately, in this book, which is quite short, they only have advice for fitted coats. So fitted coats and jackets, which look like this. I don't need as much of that, so it doesn't need as much structure as that, but I still want to add some structure to it. So I'm going to be strategically utilizing some of the canvas, maybe some of the horsehair canvas, around strategic points in the cape coat, particularly around armhole, center front, and up here around the shoulder. And then probably around the hem, or I might do a separate hem facing / stiffening. And yeah, I think I've got a plan. I'm excited for it. And I think it's going to take me a little while because coats and capes and every outerwear always takes a little while. So I'm going to stop delaying it by talking to you guys, and I'm going to go cut this out. I can do it. I can't believe I really thought I could do it, but guys, I was so delusional. Like, look at this. What I hadn't realized is this fabric is not the full width, so it's very narrow. And I would have been able to cut out the back, and then I would have had to piece the side and the bit of the sleeve cape. So there's no way I could have done this. So instead, I've pulled out a backup one. Let's see if this works. I really don't want to buy more fabric. Success! This is not ideal, but I think it will work. So I'm going to go press this fabric so I can get every last centimetre out of it, and then I'm going to finally cut out this lining. It's been hours, you guys. Okay, so I got all the pieces cut out, and I was ironing my canvas to my wool so that when I pinned it, it was like all really nicely fused together. And ironically, it turns out this was fusible canvas. So that saved me about, what, 3 hours basting all these pieces on and very carefully like herringbone stitching along these edges. And I'm kind of devastated because I really enjoyed that bit. I really enjoyed the hand sewing. So that's kind of sad, but also saved me a lot of time. And I think, you know, it's obviously not historically accurate, duh. But I do think, I always have this theory that if the Victorians, they were speedy, they were into technology. So if they had it, they would have used it. Anyway, I'm not gonna fuss about it because it's fusible, so once it's on, it's on. And instead what I'm going to do is pin and sew all of the main seams so I can try it on and see how it drapes and how it looks. But thankfully my collar pieces were not the same kind of canvas. This is the horsehair, and this does need to be hand basted and pad stitched on. So looking forward to that, some hours of hand sewing to soothe my heart. And yeah, it's coming together.
made 2 pockets. So the pattern comes with patch-on pockets, which is this pattern right here, but I thought it would look extra cute if it had a little flap on it. So I've just made this pattern out of like literally the same dimensions, and I haven't quite decided how much they'll overlap by. But yeah, and then I just turned, so they're both interfaced, and I've just turned the raw edges under, and because this is like really nice wool, it doesn't fray a lot, so I'm not going to finish them, it'll be fine. And then the last thing I need to do before I can sew these pockets on is to decide what buttons they're going to use, because it'll be much easier to do the buttonhole before the pockets are on. However, as always, I'm super indecisive, so I've put a poll up on Instagram of which pockets to decide to go with, and I think the most popular were these 2, because I'm thinking of using this burgundy velvet trim as sort of decoration, and this kind of matched it a bit. But unfortunately, I think the winner is the one I'm going to go with, which is the self-matched pockets, and these are just like your basic 2-part button things. So I only have 2, so I'm going to need to get some more, but I have just enough for the pockets. So I'm going to make some buttonholes, sew the buttons on, and then I'm going to patch on these pockets onto the main body of the cape, which is hanging just there, and then probably finish off some of the seams by flat filling them. That's a good plan. I just wanted to very quickly mention the pattern that I'm using. So as I mentioned, this is a Repeated Originals pattern. I'll leave the link down below in case you're interested, but this is an Etsy shop, and the whole thing is that they take those really awful puzzles from Victorian magazines where they give you the actual pattern, but you have to trace it out, and they've traced it out for you. And then these are all digital patterns, and you might think, whoa, this looks like tissue paper, and it is, and this is just because I wanted to mention it, but I've used this service called Fabuloso. I'll leave a link down below. It's not sponsored, but it could be. I've used them a couple of times, and what they do is you send them the pattern, the file, and they print it out for you in tissue paper with like all of the indentations, all the everything on it, and then you just cut it out like a normal commercial pattern. And I really like this because obviously when you print it out, you can print it at home, but for large patterns like this, it's really hard to like match them. It's a lot of paper, and then you have to cut them out, and printer paper is really thick, and this tissue paper folds really small, so that when you have to put all your patterns away, it's way easier. So yeah, I just wanted to drop that quick tip. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, I actually decided to add some more of that canvas interfacing to the little cape detail. So the cape detail took me a little while to figure out in the mock-up, but basically what it is, it's a cape that drapes over the front, and then it doesn't extend past the back, but you sew it down across the shoulder, and it becomes sort of a sleeve. And I've decided in the mock-up to actually sew it. I don't think you're meant to sew beyond this point, but I'm going to sew it down a little bit to give my arms a little bit more coverage. But yeah, it's really cute, but I just wanted to show you the difference. So this one on this side has got no canvas interfacing, and it actually drapes quite beautifully. And then this one, I've added some interfacing, but only across the top here, because I thought this bit could be a little bit more stable. And then it cuts out about here. You can see this, the drapery here is a lot crisper, but it also gives it a bit more shape. Like it stands away from the body a bit more. And then what I think I'm going to do is the same thing that I'm going to be doing for the hem of the cape, is I'm going to add a few inches wide piece of linen to the hem here to just give it a bit more body, and then I'll line it. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the difference in the shoulders here. I'm actually not completely sure which one I like better. This one's super drapey, but this one's a bit more structured. And the cape does stand away a bit more, so it gives it a bit more shape, but this here isn't as smooth. Maybe I should cut the interfacing away so it goes like this. So it still gives structure to the front and shoulder, but not the drapey bit. Oh god, decisions. Okay, so the internal layers of the cape portion are done, and I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what I did. So I'm not following instructions from a book specifically, but it's more overall from what I've learned about Victorian sort of dressmaking and a little bit of tailoring, very, very little only. But the whole point of Victorian strategies is to only add structure and support where you need it. So I think as modern dressmakers, it is very common to like line the whole thing or like reinforce the whole thing. But this is not it. So one of the important things that I've noticed is that if you reinforce everything, it'll either be too stiff where you don't want it to be, where the fabric is meant to drape, or something that bothers me a lot is that things get really heavy when you add 3 to 4 layers of fabric. So only add reinforcement where you need it strategically. So what I've done here is I've done the fusible canvas bit just over the chest area here. I found that if it went into the sleeve, it made the drape a bit weird. And then the other thing I did was I reinforced the hem because I wanted to add a little bit of structure to it so that it just flared out a bit better. And for this I just cut bias strips out of literally cabbage of linen that I had, and then I pieced them together very shabbily by just piecing them with a zigzag stitch, and that's because it would keep bulk away from the hem and it would make it lay flatter instead of like sewing a traditional seam and opening it. And then I basted that with a sewing machine, and then I just herringbone stitched that into place, and that's going to be caught in the hem with the lining. But it'll add a little bit of structure without adding bulk and weight to everything, and it adds a really nice drape to it. So I'm very happy with that. So the next step is actually to sew the lining to this. I'm going to just do it the old traditional, the old bag lining where you just sew it right sides together and then you clip the seams and you turn it out and you press really nicely. And I might have to top stitch. I can't decide whether to do that by machine or by hand. We'll figure it out. But I've just realized something after I finished the first sleeve cape thing, is that I think these are actually meant to be sewn onto the shoulder seam. Like when you sew the shoulder seam, I think this bit is meant to be trapped in it. Originally I thought I'd just hem it and turn and top stitch it down, which I think it might be what I have to do because I've already finished the shoulder seam. So I thought I'd just mention that in case you do buy this pattern. I think you're meant to trap that in the seam itself, but hey, lining time, then we can try and get these sleeve cape bits on maybe?
So we're coming to the end and I'm just going to set in the lining. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of this. So the lining, basically what I did was I have this mystery fabric which was in my stash. It's the right kind of weight, but what you really want is that the inside that will be against you has some slip. So this is quite smooth and has a little bit of a satiny finish, but it's not satin. But anyway, I had just enough, so I used it. And the way I'm doing the lining is I just assembled the main seams, which included the side seams and the shoulders, and then I've just turned the cape coat thing inside out, and I've pinned along the seams first, and the top, and then the hem, and then I've turned in the raw edges, and then I'm going to sew this down by hand. I really like this way of doing the lining, gives you a lot of control. But basically what I wanted to talk to you about is the back, because the back is a little bit of a mystery. So you can't quite see it here, and I didn't take footage, but you can see I've made a little pleat in the coat itself, which actually looks really cute. But that is all because in the very, very brief instructions that come with this pattern, there is a bit that says, from the original magazine, that says, the two short pieces of the back, in this case the lining, which hold the upper pleated falling piece are joined together. So the upper would be the main coat, and this is the under, and it says it's pleated. And you can tell in the pattern where it tells you to cut that it takes out some of the volume in the lining. So I've played around with the pleating a little bit, and I think that's what I'm going to go for. And I'm going to top stitch these pleats down by hand for a few inches until they flare out. But I just wanted to mention that because it's something that I had to kind of figure out. But yeah, I'm really excited to just sit down and do some very quiet hand sewing, just putting down all of these seam allowances with a tiny little whip stitch. It's looking good. So the last very bit of this project that I wanted to talk to you about is something I did at the very, very end. So with my scraps of wool, I made a belt, and I just did this so it was... The first thing I got was this buckle. I got this vintage on Etsy. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it fit. And so this determined the width of the belt. So I made the belt 2 inches wide. It's just a large rectangle folded with a seam that I put towards the back. And then I top stitched the edges, and I added the buckle just by looping through, and I did actually hand stitch, though you should probably machine stitch this. But my issue was the back, because the whole point of this coat cape thing is that it is versatile for potato days. So I wanted something that it would be a belt that I could put on for more tailored fit, and then one that would also be looser for other days. So what I decided to do is I bought these brass D-rings, and it's just going to loop through like this. So unfortunately you do see a little bit of the underside of the belt, but it's okay, it's not too messy. So it's very hard to do with one hand. You just loop it through like that, and then you can tighten it to your desired waist size. And loosen it and tighten it however you want. And I'm pretty happy with this. I think it adds a really nice touch to the cape coat. It makes it more versatile. And yeah, I'm very happy with that last bit. So all in all, I think we should go and take a look at it done and worn.